Geometry has always been at the back of all of my paintings. I would deconstruct a photograph and reconstruct it, but often change the proportions of the photograph and the underlying structure to follow a geometric grid or pattern. This is obviously Paris, but what interested me about this building is that you've got this extraordinary piece of contemporary engineering and a building that is taking its inspiration from Egypt, the pyramids. This is Paris that's brave enough not just to live off its past. So I made a painting celebrating the past and the present coming together. My first art school would be in the early 60s. The head of the art school was obsessed with the Bauhaus, and the Bauhaus was not about a hierarchy of painting at the top, sculpture, the applied arts, etc. Art was art, and design was just as important as making a painting. The Bauhaus for me was also not just a school, but it was a way of life and a way of looking at the world. Everything has to be designed, everything has some importance, and that everything starts probably with a drawing, and from a drawing it might turn into a building, or it could turn into a painting or a print or textiles, etc. There was this very broad base that I was working on. And one of the tutors that I had said, well, why don't you apply straight to the Royal College? I was going to become a painter, and I was surrounded mainly by abstract painters. But I'd come from North Wales. My community were mainly farmers. I felt very alienated, and I was fortunate enough to meet a fellow student called John Bellamy, who was a committed figurative painter and seen as quite an oddity. But for me, he was showing me the way forward. It also coincided with an exhibition of Max Beckmann's work at the Tate. So all of a sudden I was looking at work that moved me, and this work was partly political, it was very personal, it was very much about society. And instead of making work that was an abstraction, I made work that was trying to be more and more descriptive of the world that surrounded me and people that surrounded me. And I was very moved by German Expressionism. And I became a poor man's George Grosz, Max Beckmann, and a bit of Francis Bacon thrown in. They were very unpleasant, sensationally aggressive paintings, appropriate for an angry young person trying to make a statement, look at me. In the fourth year, a visitor bought one of my drawings, took it to their apartment in New York. There it was seen by a gallerist who called me up in the middle of the night and offered me an exhibition on Madison Avenue. That exhibition allowed me to be objective. I saw it as if it was somebody else's work. It was in frames, it was on a very fancy wall with a lot of very rich people drinking cocktails. And I looked at the work and I thought, this is somebody else's work. I am fooling myself that this is where I belong. Fortunately, the show was successful enough that it gave me 2 years' money to come back to London, find a studio, and find my own direction. And that direction, I think, was influenced by living in New York, a city that was building itself every day. New was normal. In London, preserve the past was more normal. All of a sudden, I saw the beauty and the dynamics of the built environment and the chance of building the future. I look at my old sketchbooks, and I'd kept cuttings of architects I enjoyed, And I thought, well, here is my subject matter. This is the way for me to go forward and explore something that's always important to me, which is geometry and colour. But the geometry and colour were hung on a subject, and the subject was recognisable, and I was celebrating mainly contemporary architecture. Geometry has always been at the back of all of my paintings. I would deconstruct a photograph and reconstruct it, but often change the proportions of the photograph and the underlying structure to follow a geometric grid or pattern. I've become familiar with the golden section, the work of other people exploring platonic solids and geometry. I built up a set of 12 paintings. They were taking about 3 months each. I was rejected by 2 galleries, referred to the ICA, and I ended up having a show there 6 months later. When I had the show, the head of one of the galleries that had initially rejected me said, "I'll buy all the paintings, but you've got to sign a worldwide exclusive contract, and I will pay you not only for these 12 paintings, but a monthly check and give you a show every 2 years." So between the exhibition at the ICA and being taken on by a gallery that was giving me a retainer, what happened is that I deepened my respect and my inquisitiveness for the world of architecture, and I particularly homed in on certain architects. One was Richard Rogers, Norman Foster, James Stirling. And I made paintings that celebrated their buildings. I had no contact with these architects at all, but I kept on getting phone calls. It would be an architect that would say, "Oh, we've just finished a building. We've seen your work in architectural journals and wondered if you would make a painting of our new building." That wasn't what I wanted to do. So I'd say, "No, I'm sorry. If I think that I can find something that I can explore within the imagery of your building, I will do that, and then I'll perhaps let you see it before anybody else does." But along with those many phone calls, I did get one from James Stirling, who was known as Big Jim, and he was big in every way. His reputation was big, his intellect was big, and he was a big presence. And he said, "I've just finished a building, and do you think I could come to your studio so I could talk to you about it?" Well, you don't turn down an invitation from a man to come and talk about a building that you already know you're interested in finding more about. And he came in and then described it, showed me certain views and said, "I think you could make a very good painting of it. Would you like to take on a commission?" And had to look inside myself and say, have I got the courage to remain independent of him? So I said, "No, I'm sorry. I know that I will make a painting of it, but I'll phone you up in 6 months' time if I've made the painting and you can come and look at it." And sure enough, he came along, and I was very proud of the painting. And he walked up to the painting, and he's got right up to it, close by, and he tapped the surface. He said, "Good painting. Too much Ben, not enough Jim. Bye." So I knew, it confirmed I did exactly the right thing. I made a painting that was Ben, not a painting that was Jim. And I've always found that quite a challenging situation. But I've always insisted that I will never take on a commission where they tell me what I should be painting. Category that I was being put in when I was being reviewed by any critics would be photorealism. Many critics could be quite lazy, and in fact what they would do is say, "I haven't got time to go to the gallery," so they'd look at a photograph of a painting that was based on a photograph, and they'd say, "Well, this is photorealism." Whereas I had spent several months redrawing, reconstructing spaces, analysing the architecture that was my subject matter and the geometric relationships, and then spent an enormous amount of time mixing colours and integrating colours on the surface, in those days often through a gridded screen, so it was print in a newspaper. Mechanical pointillism, because I was interested in what happens when you take in an image, a painting, and you say, that's a Mies van der Rohe building. And then you walk forward and you say, oh no, it's a painting. And you walk forward even further and you say, it's just blobs of paint on the surface. I had been put into the camp of photorealism. Photorealism had really been given a very, very bad press in Britain. That's just copying photographs. At its best, it's graphic design. I don't quite know why it got such a bad press. I just knew for me, I was making paintings that were very accessible by a very broad audience. People could take them on face value and just say, it is an image of something that I could see on the next street corner. It was very important for me to be using a common language that could be understood by the common person. I was painting paintings for people like me. I've always been a craftsperson. I like using my hands. I don't have a label I can put on myself. All I can say is that I'm Ben Jonson doing what Ben Jonson does. My work isn't generally accepted in the mainstream of contemporary art, so I'm seen as a bit of an outsider. But I did start to have some serious ambitions, and one of them was that maybe cityscapes are an important statement of how a group of architects confront society and a community. How do you put buildings together, not as individual works of art, but as places that form an environment that people will grow up in? So it's not just the building, but everything that surrounds it. So I started to look at cityscapes as potential subject matter. It was a very interesting experience. And I realized that making these paintings was important because I was interested in the paintings being used as a catalyst for discussing community and society and the patterns of cities as they are, as they have been, but as they might be in the future. So this is a reproduction of my painting of Liverpool. The original painting is 3 meters by 5 meters. This building alone took 3 months to draw. And after the drawing's made, I have to make stencils because I use a spray gun and I spray through the stencils. And there are 550 stencils for this building alone. Every window will have the mullions, the divisions of the glass on the window. You've got the right number of steps going up to the front door. You've got all the details that are on the roof and within these 4 corners. Each one is drawn both with the photographs, which weren't aerial photographs, they were photographs taken of the building from the ground, but they had to be translated into a 3-dimensional image, which is based on a physical model that was made 30 years ago. And I could then impose all the details on top of that model. But it was the model that gave me the ability to take the range of the painting, going from the church cathedral, Liverpool Cathedral on the right the way through to the 2 football grounds. I moved the football grounds into the painting because they wouldn't otherwise be seen, but you can't paint Liverpool without its 2 football grounds, any more than you could paint it without its 2 cathedrals, the Anglican and the Catholic. Out of the blue, I got a phone call from a curator in Liverpool, And she said, in 3 years' time, we're going to be European City of Culture. We want something that's legacy from that year. We want a painting that shows our city on the day that it celebrates being European City of Culture, but also its historic establishment as a city. I said, the people of Liverpool are very down to earth. I want them to see me working on the painting, so I agreed that I would finish the painting in public. They gave me a room next to Stubbs and Gainsborough, wonderful contemporary work, but they allowed me to work in one of the gallery spaces, and they said, we'll get some people to explain what you're doing. But who's going to be interested? If we're lucky, we'll get 20 people a day. We ended up having 1,200 people a day coming to watch us. I used to go in the morning, and there'd be a queue of people people sitting in a row with notes for me, telling me all the things I had to put in and why I had to put them in. They wanted the statue of Billy Fury. They wanted the Cavern Club to be clear. They wanted their mum's first school to be visible. You know, you can't replace experiences like that. They're just so moving. They made me realize that I am incredibly privileged to be so self-indulgent, but also I have a duty to the people that have allowed me to do that. And that's the people that surround me. My assistants that are normally in the studio. I couldn't do it without them, but also I couldn't do it without the encouragement and support of a society. I've painted only the buildings, but what I'm painting is what the people have made. And I'd never put people in my paintings, because to portray a person, you've got to have a depth of integrity and skill which I don't have. I can paint what people make, and I'll do it with love, respect, and strength, I hope. I can even make the mundane look majestic, but I can't paint what makes people tick and think, and the blood that pumps through their heart and goes into their heads and comes out of their mouths. There are one or two painters, you know, the Rembrandts, Lucien Freud's, that show you not only what's on the surface, but what's below the surface, or Vermeer, those moments of human sublime moments. I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I know quite a few people absolutely hate my paintings, and they say, God, there's no humanity in there. You've cleaned every trace of the human being out of it. But I want my painting to be just one statement, and I would like somebody else to use the painting as a reason to be angry and give an alternative statement. I would like it to spark off a discussion. I want it to be a catalyst for change and debate. I don't think I'm summing up the city when I make a painting of it. I'm scratching the skin. And not even the skin from the whole body, just a little patch of skin from the shoulder or the forehead. I want the painting to be a beginning for people to think and go off on their own journeys. There's a particular architect whose work I admire, and he had been working on a building in Germany that was badly destroyed by both the British and then by the Russian troops after the war. And he had restored and renovated and represented the museum in its glorious stage of its existence, but he left the scars of the past visible within the building. And I thought this was something very important. And I made 4 paintings over a 2-year period based on the Neues Museum by David Chipperfield. And I felt that I was doing something important. But also, my wife reminded me of a holiday we'd had with the family when they were young, and we were in southern Spain, and we thought, we'll go and look at the Alhambra in Granada. And I went in with a tripod, camera. I spent 2 or 3 hours absolutely bowled over by this extraordinary structure, all geometry, generating love, poetry, passion. It was just glorious. And it was my first direct introduction to Islamic architecture and the world of Islam and the celebration of Islam. That set me up with 5 years' work. I've made maybe 6 or 7 paintings based on the Alhambra, but also that has brought me to looking more deeply into geometry and formal mathematics and structure, and the idea that within mathematics and the material world, one can find the spiritual world. And that probably is always my driving force, to transcend the material and enter the world of the spiritual, a world of peace and tranquility. So that has been the next stage of my development, and just now the work I'm on, which is some from a German museum, where I'm not showing the contents of the museum, but this temple of culture. And I'm also looking at Japanese tea rooms, which is a place of ceremony and a place for reflection. And the studio itself continues to be, and increasingly I want to make it, a place of meditation and reflection. My paintings are trying to find a moment of stillness. T.S. Eliot's still place in the turning world. When I was teaching and had students, they'd often come with their portfolio and say, I needed to have taken this drawing a bit further. But when I took it a bit further, I ruined it. So I've stopped going a bit further. If I think it'll do, I've left it. I would say, but if you go to the next stage, when you ruin it, you've got to keep working and you will get back the freshness that it had 2 steps back. And you get this new, fresh object where you've confronted the problems, you've worked through the problem, and you've given birth to a new creation. I was traveling in Mexico and I went into a museum, found myself in a room where there was a wall with quite serious indentations, scarring, some chair that was ripped apart, and there are a few other objects. This house had played a part in the revolution. And the story that I learned was that the owner of the house had traveled to Mexico City to gather guns to help people that wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the government at the time. He gets back to his house, the guns are put in the basement, he goes up to greet his wife and children, and at that point the military and police burst in and he's machine gunned in front of his family. And the walls are marked with the bullet holes. I come back to London and I have these photographs, but I decided I wanted to make a painting because I'm very interested in scars. Because I think we are all scarred, and it doesn't mean that we're unattractive. It just means that we might represent a slightly different character. And maybe we have to realize that life's a bit more than the superficial. It's more than the scar on the surface. My father was an eccentric, an unusual rule breaker, did witness a lot of violence. And I'll never forget the sound of the screaming, my feelings of guilt that I never stopped my father from beating my mother so badly. One night, my mother coming into the room and saying, I think your father is going to do something very terrible. I don't want you to be here. I've got some people waiting at the end of the garden. She pushed me through a hedge. I didn't know who they were, and they took me to a safe house where I had to wait. We go to sleep, we get up, and she took me past the house, and virtually all the doors and windows were broken. Many years later, I was being interviewed, and I told him the story of my upbringing, as well as how long I spend making a painting and how important that is, that I construct every piece perfectly and put it together so it's all perfect. And he said, what you've been doing is trying to put back that house that you left 50 years ago. You've been trying to put it back together. And I think he's probably right, that art has been my therapy. I remember one play in particular by Tennessee Williams. It was The Glass Menagerie. And the narrator says, I am the opposite of the stage magician. The stage magician gives you illusion in the disguise of reality, whereas I am here to give you reality in the pleasant disguise of illusion. So that's what I'm trying to do within my paintings. I'm offering you an illusion of space and depth, and I want to entertain you and pull you into the painting. But when you've realized that all I'm doing is creating an illusion of a building or a room, an interior, maybe what you're left with is the reality of somebody that just handles raw materials to try and create an emotional response. You're just left with the illusion as an introduction to a reality of the physical world of making.